This is the Silver and Black Today podcast, your source for Raiders news and information. Now, here's your hosts, swaggering boisterously.
All right, happy Wednesday, everybody. A hump day version of the podcast here on the Silver and Black Today. That's right. I'm Scott Branson, founder and publisher of silverandblacktoday.com. And we wanted to climb on with you. Had a great column run by our own Hayden Nadolny this morning or this afternoon, depending where you're at, and want to talk about that. Just a reminder, though, too, is that we have our CBS Sports Radio show, which is every Sunday morning from 8 to 10 a.m. Pacific time here in the States. It is, again, on CBS Sports Radio, 1140 a.m. in Las Vegas if you're here in town. But we have a lot of listeners from outside because, of course, Raider Nation is a worldwide thing. And if you want to listen to us and you're outside of Las Vegas, you can. You just download the radio.com app. You can do that from your iOS phone, your Apple phone, or from your Android phone. You can also listen on your computer. So if you're at home and you got your coffee and you're reading news on your laptop, whatever it is, just go to radio.com, search Silver and Black Today, and you will find us, and you can listen to us live there. It's really cool, and you can listen to, pretty much all the great sports radio stations around the country, and then also music and talk. So make sure you download the radio.com app to listen to us on Sundays. And we're here to talk about a story on the website, so make sure you always check out silverandblacktoday.com. Talented writers like Hayden Nadolny, who's joining us tonight, today, his time, and Chris Reed, a bunch of other folks, Jay Burrows, great stuff on there. Make sure you do that as well as we get closer and closer, Raider Nation, to the draft. Yes, just several weeks away, and we're going to be talking about that today with Hayden. Hayden's joining us all the way from Australia, where it is Thursday. Hayden, how are you this morning over there?
I'm doing very well, thanks. How are you, Scott?
I'm good, man. Keeping busy. You know, we have not only this and getting prepared for the draft, and we're going to have a big draft show on CBS Sports Radio, which we're going to have the details on very soon. And then I launched a baseball site. I know Aussies like baseball too, so that's good. But a passion project for me here we have a AAA affiliate here of the Oakland A's, the Las Vegas Aviators, who are moving into a new ballpark, and we were out there yesterday for Media Day. Just a beautiful facility. So keeping myself busy with that. But this show, of course, Hayden's about football, and it's about Raider football. So we want to jump right into this subject because this is a very sensitive subject, as I've seen your Twitter followers interacting with you over the last day or so, bringing up the fact that the Raiders could very well take a quarterback and take a quarterback high in the draft. And that's your story up on the website, Quarterback Buzz in the Air, like it or not. And despite the fact that Mike Mayock and John Gruden have said numerous times now that Derek Carr is their starting quarterback, i.e. their franchise quarterback, that does not necessarily preclude them from drafting a quarterback high in the draft this year. First of all, why do you, Derek Carr, and you've said you've been very objective about Derek Carr. I've been sort of a Carr defender, especially last year, first year in a system and all that. Tell us, though, why you think this is such a polarizing subject for Raider fans right now.
I think it's polarizing because at the end of the day, Derek Carr was an MVP candidate in 2016. And, had he stayed healthy, there was a pretty reasonable chance that year that they were going to at least make it into the AFC Championship game and probably would have gone up against one of the better teams in the league. So there was a very, a high that the Raiders and especially Carr was going through in 2016. And then when he got his injury, I'm not going to say he's become a shell of himself, but he's certainly not showing that 2016 form, and it's certainly not as consistent as it once was. And as a result, there's a lot of is he going to make it back there? Is he just the player he is now? And people are quite unsure about where Derek Carr fits in the grand scheme of things.
No, it's a good point, and of course we talked about it all season here on the podcast and on the radio show. And it's really is. I mean, I find that so many people, and if I had to put a percentage on it, I'd say maybe 30 to 40% of Raider fans are not convinced, and some even very negative about Derek Carr. 60 to 70% really support him. And if you look at his numbers, you're absolutely right. When you go back to that almost MVP season before breaking his leg, obviously, in week 16, before they were going to make it in the playoffs there, his numbers are still good. There has been a process for him because of the injuries, because of the broken bone in the back, of course. Again, in 2017 as well, there's been a lot of obstacles in Derek Carr's way, right? I still believe Derek Carr is going to be the quarterback this coming season, 2019. And if he performs well, I think he'll be the quarterback in 2020 and beyond. But I think if you read your column and your story, what you wrote on the website, the one thing that I think people fail to realize, number one, is that as a coach and as a GM, or in some cases like John Gruden, both in essence, you have to always look at possibilities and you have to explore all the talent available in a draft, and you can't rule anything out because, I mean, Hayden, you don't know what's going to happen picks 1 through 3. You just don't, because crazier things have happened. Everybody thinks they know how it's going to go, and it goes a completely different direction. And suddenly you're finding somebody who's offering you a trade. You can trade down, you can trade up. It depends, right? It depends on what people are thinking on the day. So from that perspective, no one has a crystal ball. But walk us through a little bit of your thought process here on why they may address this position and address it early in the 2019 draft.
Okay, so what you have to consider is these two, the top 3 guys really at the quarterback position in the draft, Kyler Murray, Dwayne Haskins, and Drew Lock. And I'm not really going to talk too much about Drew Lock because I would be extremely surprised if he were to be drafted at pick 4. But Kyler Murray and Haskins, at the very least, they are 2 guys that could be potential franchise quarterbacks in the right system. I mean, Kyler Murray was an absolute jet for Oklahoma last season. He won the Heisman Trophy, ran for over 1,000 yards on the ground. In addition to his, it was about 4,700 yards passing thereabouts. I'm not 100% sure. And then you've got Dwayne Haskins, who threw over 50 touchdowns for the Buckeyes. So both of these guys have a reasonable college production, if only for a short amount of time. And you really, when it comes down to being a GM like Mike Mayock, you have to ask yourself, okay, are these players better than what we currently have? Mm-hmm. And we also have to consider that Derek Carr's contract is pretty team-friendly. You can get out of it fairly easily without getting too much dead money going forward. I think they would have to pay him about $18 million this year in dead money if they were to release him or to trade him. But going forward, it wouldn't be any more dead money on the cap. And then on top of that, you would be able to have a quarterback on a rookie contract. And we've seen that the top teams in the league recently, such as the Kansas City Chiefs and the LA Rams, they're going the route where they get a rookie quarterback and they build around that guy. And there's a fair bit of logic there that suggests that you could draft one of those top quarterbacks if you believe that you're going to get similar production out of Derek Carr, and you're going to get a similar production with these rookies. And then you can trade Carr potentially for, if you can get a first-round pick, you obviously take that, and then you can add another player to build around your rookie quarterback. It's one of those things where it's a bit of chicken or the egg, but I can see the logic going for both sides.
No, there's no doubt. And the thing with this, Hayden, is, you have to always, again, as I said earlier, you have to always have options available to you, and you can't ever close the door on something because you don't know where talks can go. You're in a draft situation, somebody offers you something at number 4, it's not great, you don't want it, and then suddenly somebody comes out of nowhere, is willing to take on a player, is willing to give you what you want for that pick, or if you're moving up, vice versa. and suddenly the whole landscape changes. So this is part of what these guys are doing right now is not only do they have their draft board, but they have scenarios all war gamed out to make sure that no matter what is thrown at them, they have the opportunity to act on it. Now, if we look at this, and you mentioned the 3 quarterbacks that are assumed to go in the first round, including 2 of them really in the top 10 as projected, maybe even the top 6. Let's look at them, because you talked about Kyler Murray, of course, Heisman Trophy winner, amazing athlete. The interviews, from what we've ascertained and heard and read, the interviews with Kyler Murray were mixed, which you hear a lot of GMs say that the interview is actually the most important part of the combines, because watching the tape is going to give you more information than you're going to see really at a combine. And so when you look at that, for me, and I want you to argue with me, for me, I just as good as he could be, I would not be willing to take the risk in the top 4 picks on Kyler Murray. I actually like Haskins better. Yes, he's more of a traditional drop back passer. He's not the runner that Kyler Murray is. But you tell me why, if you're John Gruden, Mike Mayock, why is he a guy with all the needs you have on your roster, including those on defense that we talked about, the need for a tight end? Talk to me why you might be willing to either trade up or take him if he's there at number 4.
Okay, so the comparison I want to look at is, let's go to what Kansas City did a few years ago when they took Pat Mahomes in the first round, despite having Alex Smith, who was a very reliable veteran for them. He fit the system. He wasn't going to win you games, but he certainly wasn't going to lose you any games. And you could really have a solid team around Alex Smith. And Andy Reid and the GM John Dorsey at the time, they went for the jugular. They traded up. They took Pat Mahomes, and now look at what Pat Mahomes has done. And I'm not going to get into specifics, but the Raiders brass, specifically John Gruden, sees a lot of Pat Mahomes in Kyler Murray.
Well, yeah, but see, the problem I have with that, Hayden, is Pat Mahomes is 6'3". Okay, so you talk about size. I'm not talking about athletic ability, but to play in the NFL, the punishment, all the things we hear that are negatives against a smaller quarterback. Those got to be concerns. Or do you believe that his ability is such that he could be that game changer like Mahomes, that you overlook that and say, you know what, we'll worry about it. We'll build him a good offensive line. We'll control how we run the offense so that we don't put him in harm's way too much. Or do you agree with me though that it has to be a part of the decision making process to look at his size?
Oh, you have to look at the size, but at the same time, the last 2 quarterbacks to really come out in the last decade to 15 years who had really solid college production, but their size was the thing that was bringing them down, were Drew Brees and Russell Wilson. Mm-hmm. And look how they've gone. And then we also saw 12 months ago, there was a lot of talk about Baker Mayfield with his lack of size. And, I mean, he had a very good season with Cleveland last year, and he looks like a true franchise quarterback for the next decade. When it comes to size for the quarterbacks, you really have to consider, are we going to be able to build our offense around a smaller quarterback? Because there are certain things that you are going to have to change. And if you can't adapt, then there's no point in drafting. But if you can adapt and make the system better and accentuate someone like Kyler Murray's strengths, you could have a really special player for the next decade. And that's something that John Gruden is quite intrigued by at the moment.
Yeah, it's a fascinating point and well thought out and hard to argue with. I mean, I think you could still go back to even I mean, Russell Wilson, a much bigger guy from a stature and a size perspective, not from a height perspective per se, although he's 2 inches. I still think Murray is not 5'10", 5'11", as he's been measured a couple times, but that's okay. But again, the athletic ability, the ability to be a playmaker, right? We now live in an era in the NFL where it's about playmaking. It's not the same NFL it was 15 years ago, and that's why a guy like Pat Mahomes, despite his larger stature, still makes plays, and Baker Mayfield did a great example and showed that last year as well. So now when you look at Murray compared to like a Dwayne Haskins, do you think this is a case in your mind that if the Raiders are going to make a move on a quarterback, and they stay in the top 4, meaning they either pick at 4 or they trade up, is it all about Murray, or could they be in a situation where Dwayne Haskins is also an option?
Oh, Haskins has to be considered an option at this point. Mm-hmm. He threw 50 touchdowns with the Buckeyes.
Just a few, right?
Yeah, he can certainly sling it. But I don't. Well, I'll be very surprised if the Raiders were to draft Haskins. If you look at the prototypical quarterback that John Gruden has liked as a coach, you look at guys that, they can really sling the ball and they've got great arm strength and they can get it down the field, but they're also really quite mobile and they're quite agile. Let's take a look at Rich Gannon in Oakland. Mm-hmm. They also, at that time, they also drafted Marcus Tuiasosopo, who was a traditional West Coast quarterback who could move in the pocket. They had Brad Johnson, who could get out in the open on the move in the outside the pocket. Then they also drafted Chris Sims. He could move. They also had Jeff Garcia for a time in Tampa, and he was quite good at extending the play. And then they had Bruce Gradkowski as well. So if you look at the traditional quarterback types that John Gruden prefers, I don't think he's a fan necessarily of that tall 6'5", heave it down the field 60, 65 yards on a dime. Well, obviously you like that, but I think that he likes that idea of being able to extend plays with their feet. And you could see that during the season he was really encouraging Derek Carr to move in the pocket and get outside the pocket at times and not be afraid to use his feet to get extra yards, because I've reviewed just the first 5 games of the season over the last few days, and especially early on in the season, Carr just wasn't using his feet at all, and you could see that Gruden was getting quite frustrated with that, and it definitely improved as the year went on, but I don't think he's the prototypical fit for what John Gruden wants in a quarterback.
Yeah. Well, and John Gruden, having been a smaller stature quarterback himself, I'm sure that plays into it a little bit. But one of the things too, and I saw some of your readers mixing it up with you a little bit on Twitter earlier today, and that was the contention. And I want to talk about this because history teaches us a lot. We can look into history as a way for cues on how people may behave and act. One of the things that people asked you was, hey, listen, yes, to your point that you just made, Hayden, John Gruden, the type of quarterback, he's not looking for the big, tall, in-the-pocket quarterback all the time. He wants somebody who can move his feet, can be mobile. But at the same time, as much as people think that Gruden is enamored with quarterbacks, when he's run drafts, he has not taken a quarterback high in the draft. And that includes some really good quarterback classes where he had the opportunity to. Talk a little bit about that and how, in this case, history might not be the best way to look for how he may act.
Well, you already had established quarterbacks where he was. They did draft Tuiasosopo in the second round, and he was meant to be Gannon's heir, had that gone through. And then if you look at throughout the time that John Gruden was in Tampa, well, he had Brad Johnson was already a stabilizing force there, and then they had Jeff Garcia, who was there for a few years as well. So they had a lot of stability at that quarterback position, and they weren't never necessarily in a position where they had to take a quarterback early.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's interesting, though, because I think that the fans, this time of the year especially, like everybody's getting geared up, especially Raider fans, coming off another rough season that started with so much optimism. And then, of course, that optimism in most cases has been renewed now based on the fact of the free agent and the free agent signings and the trade, of course, Antonio Brown, that they made during this offseason. But a lot of folks are sitting there with a lot of time to think about their Raiders and ask these questions. And you're just still seeing that struggle of, boy, we need this, we need that, when they talk about their team. And the quarterback position is one that is just always polarizing, right? And when you look at Mike Mayock, too, and what he said, I think a lot of people don't look at, or they look at face value, right? So when Mike Mayock and John Gruden say he's our quarterback, well, yeah, he's your quarterback on February 26th, right? And you're saying, yeah, he's our starting quarterback. That can, of course, change. Some people might call that not telling the truth. It's the truth at the time. Truth changes over time, right? And so we're at a time, right, Hayden, where they're playing chess. They're not going to tell you exactly what they're going to do. They're not going to tell you exactly what they're thinking or what they're exploring, because it's a competitive sport. It's a competitive business. And so when people get all worked up about what people say, what would you tell them?
Well, at the end of the day, you have to consider that, imagine that if Mayock went out and said, you know what, he's not our quarterback, we're looking to trade him, we're going to draft one in the first round. You know, what choice does Mayock have to say when he's given a question like that? Of course he's their quarterback right now. Right. He gets pigeonholed in where he's getting a question where the person already knows what the answer is. So he doesn't really have a choice, and it's quite telling that especially if you look at John Gruden and what he has said about Carr, he has specifically said, I do not want to get involved into the trade rumors. I do not want to get involved in about the rumors concerning us being the Raiders, taking a quarterback and moving on from Carr. And it's quite telling. You have to, at draft time, you really have to look at it much as what's not being said as much as what actually is getting told publicly.
Yeah, no, that's a great point as well. And to me, I think that's where folks have to watch out is you talk a lot about it where you say, look, there's a lot of smoke here. And usually sometimes there can be misdirection, there can be something happening. But when there's that much smoke, not only things that you're hearing, but things we're hearing, things that you see the other beat writers up in the Bay Area when they make comments that you read between the lines. This is not something that a lot of people look at it as, well, you're just hating on Derek Carr. And in my view, it has nothing to do with Derek Carr other than, do you think he's the right choice? And we don't know. There's two people who are going to make that decision, right? Maybe three if Mark Davis is involved somewhat. But otherwise, it's those two guys. It's John Gruden, it's Mike Mayock, and whether or not they think he is the guy that can lead them to a Super Bowl championship, right? And so I try to say this all the time when we talk about it, and I said it during the course of the year, Hayden, and that is, I like Derek Carr. I like him as a quarterback too. When you talk about possibilities of teams making moves, changing personnel, that is not a negative against Derek Carr, right?
No, it can't be. At the end, you just have to consider, look, is this quarterback an upgrade on Derek Carr? If it is, can you move Derek Carr on for a price that is reasonable, that allows you to add a position of value elsewhere? And if you can, then you make the trade and you draft a quarterback high. We all know that the Raiders, they might be considered in a rebuild, but I mean, if you look at some other teams around the league, they've been able to rebuild quite quickly, and they've done it with a rookie quarterback. So there's no reason why they can't draft a rookie quarterback and from day one put that guy in and potentially set the world on fire when they go to Vegas.
Okay, so that's the other thing too is you need to draft players, right, that are going to make you a better team. They're going to drive you towards your ultimate goal, which is, of course, a Super Bowl championship. And so no matter what position you're looking at or what you're looking to do, that is your end goal. At the same time, do you think, I mean, you look at it from the perspective of they are building, they're also moving. They need to get a new market here in Las Vegas, excited about them coming, which is growing and growing each day. That also plays into the decision, though. If you can make a big move that's going to not only help your football team get better, but is going to make a big splash, just like they did in the offseason with the trades and the free agent signings, that's part of it. It's not going to drive your football decisions, but it's also not a bad secondary reason, is it not?
No, of course not. But that, like you said, that is secondary to what comes on the field, which is production first and foremost.
Sure. Now let's talk about this, Hayden. Now you're never guaranteed of where, like you said, the beauty of the NFL is the parity, and that is that you can go from being a 3 or 4 win team to winning 8 or 9 games the next year, make the playoffs, and sometimes even do better than that. And so you can turn things around quickly. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that the Raiders improve by 2 or 3 games. They have more talent, but you never know what's going to happen with injury and all that. And so let's say they're able to do that. They're able to get to 7 wins, and they miss the playoffs again. So their draft status will again be pretty favorable in the top of the first round. If you look at next year's quarterback class, okay, names like Tua, names like Justin Herbert, names like Jake Fromm, who's my favorite guy, KJ Costello from Stanford, and even Jake Eason up in Washington. Next year's quarterback class, now, while they're not as dynamic as far as an athlete as Kyler Murray, if you're a team and you're looking for that quarterback and you really think you don't have a lot of risk, as you said with Derek Carr this year, why not wait till next year?
It's too risky. When you find a quarterback that you like and you want to pull the trigger, you pull the trigger. If you think that you've got the next Pat Mahomes or the next Tom Brady waiting in the wings and you can acquire that guy, you don't wait 12 months to see what's going on. I mean, let's go to a few players that recently have stayed an extra 12 months and their stock has dropped down. We saw a guy like Jake Locker. He was meant to be the number 1 pick in the draft. He went top 10, but he was not a good player. Matt Barkley was a surefire. He was like the number 1 pick potentially going into his final season at USC, and he ended up in the 5th round. So guys can fall off a cliff in 12 months. So really, when you think that you've got a guy that you really like and you've got the opportunity to take him and it fits exactly what you're doing, you don't think twice about it. You just pull the trigger.
Well, you do, but you also have to. I mean, when you're evaluating, you have to be so in love with that player. And I know that a lot of folks use that as a criticism for Gruden, right? They say, hey, listen, he falls in love with these guys and he doesn't see the downside or he doesn't see the risk and he just goes after them, a la Al Davis, right? Al Davis loved athletic talent, and sometimes he would draft guys maybe higher than they should be, and they didn't always work out. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. And I think that's where a lot of Raider fans, especially older Raider fans who have a long history and know what it's been like for the last 20 years, that I think is the concern for people. But to your point, if you like the player enough, you're going to go get him. But at the same time, you know, if you have to, everything has to fall into place, right? You're not going to get guaranteed if you think that you need to pick number 1 overall to get Kyler Murray, then what you're going to have to give up could be very high. So when we look at that situation, Hayden, and you're sitting there at number 4, and let's say you're going to, for hypothetical, you want to trade up to number 1 to ensure that you get Kyler Murray because he is the guy who's going to lead you to the promised land. So what's it going to take? I mean, realistically, people are going to ask for the world, of course. But when you look at the history of the draft and what's happened at the top of the draft, you mentioned some of the trades in your piece on silverandblacktoday.com. Talk a little bit about that and what might need to fall into place if they're in love with him. Again, these are all hypotheticals. But if they were to do this and trade up to number 1 to grab Murray, what would they have to give up?
The 2 comparable trades when I was doing my research from the latest article on silverandblacktoday.com was a trade in 2004. It was between the Chargers and the Giants, and that was the Eli Manning and the Rivers trade. So Eli Manning was drafted number 1 by the Chargers, and they traded him for pick 4, which was Phillip Rivers. They also acquired a 3rd-round pick, which went to be Nate Kading. He was the kicker, and then they also received a future 1st-round pick from the Giants, and that turned out to be Sean Merriman. So that they received an extra 3rd and an extra 1 to move up the 3 spots. And we can look at another comparable trade in 2017. It's a bit closer to today. It's when Chicago gave up a 3rd, a 4th, and a future 3rd to move up 1 spot in the 2017 draft. It was from 3rd to 2nd, and they drafted Mitch Trubisky. So I really don't think that the Raiders would be able to give anything less than their 2nd-round pick to move up 3 spots. That being said, I really do think that it could be potentially they'd have to give up maybe pick 27. So you could say 4 and 27 for pick 1. It's a hefty price. Is it worth it? I don't know. I'm glad I don't have to make that decision.
Well, and in that case, you have also, if you're going to grab Kyler Murray, you have Derek Carr. Now, that does not mean that if they draft Kyler Murray that they have to trade Derek Carr. If they find a suitor and that's part of the deal, fine. If they don't, they could draft Murray, and Carr could still be around for another year, correct?
Correct, but I doubt that would happen because Derek Carr is not the kind of person that's going to be mentoring a young quarterback at his age. He's already essentially said that he believes he's the starter, and there's very little chance of that happening. But the net positive at the end, when you consider if they were to trade Derek Carr, let's say they got a first for him. So really, it would be pick 4 and let's say pick 27. Mm-hmm. They gave that up for pick 1. They draft Kyler Murray, and then they get pick, let's say, 13 from the Dolphins. Okay, so you get Kyler Murray and pick 13 for 4, 27, and Derek Carr. Is it worth it?
You better love that quarterback.
Could be. Yeah. Oh, definitely.
But the thing is, too, is if you look at John Gruden's situation, again, every time the national media here in the United States talks about him, what's the first thing they say? Well, when you got a $100 million 10-year contract, you can do whatever you want. And it's sort of true, right? So he can do what he wants, and not saying that you recover easily from a number 1 draft pick being a bust. And I'm not saying he would be a bust. I'm just saying there's always a possibility. And so they have the luxury of doing that. And I think with Derek Carr, at this point, what are teams willing to give for him? Raider fans and others look at Derek Carr and they might see value, but we're not scouts. We're not people who work in the league. We're not people who might see something that fits in their system, or the personality fits with the coaching staff or with whatever. And so I think the value of Derek Carr is going to be different depending who you're talking to, depending on the needs of the team that might be interested in him. And so I agree with you. I don't see him sticking around if they were to do that. But with all of this talk in the offseason around this, let's say it does not materialize, and the Raiders do not draft a quarterback at the top of the draft, i.e. Kyler Murray. I still think that they will draft a quarterback at some time. Even Kelly Kreiner, our draft analyst, said that he would be surprised if Drew Lock was there at the end of the first round, let's say at number 24, he feels like Gruden would grab him in a second. And, of course, that's a first-round pick as well. But if they don't do it there, they might go for a Ryan Finley later in the third or something like that. But what has this done for Derek Carr psychologically, do you think? If they don't go for a high-end quarterback who's going to come in and most likely be a starter pretty quickly, how does this impact him? Is it going to be more motivating if it doesn't happen? Or do you think it's going to perhaps sour things for him?
If Derek Carr is still on the team in 2019, it will mean that they haven't drafted a quarterback high. Mm-hmm. And what that will mean is that 2019 will become a referendum on Derek Carr being the Raiders quarterback in the long term. So the pressure is going to be on him, whether he likes it or not. All eyes are going to be on Derek Carr in 2019 if he's still a Raider. I certainly think he's feeling the pressure, though. If you listen to what David Carr has been saying, his brother on NFL Network and in a few ESPN shows lately, I'm not going to say that David's making excuses, but he's certainly it just seems like they're sort of positioning themselves in such a way where this could happen, where he could be moved on. And previously there was a lot of the way that the Cars would address things was there was no chance Derek was going to 100%, he was going to remain a Raider. And there's just been a slight disposition of that in the last week or so, week to 10 days. And it's not surprising that has coincided with the recent workouts of Kyler Murray and Dwayne Haskins.
Right. And also, the one thing that I've talked about since John Gruden, going back to the Mac trade even, is the fact that what John Gruden has done, and I think this is what upsets a lot of the talking heads, the former league executives, the former coaches, the former players, who all just came out with fear and fury about John Gruden having lost his mojo, having lost his sense of what the game was about, his timeliness, all this stuff last year when that was all happening. And I said at that time, I wrote a piece and I talked about it on the show, which was, no, this is very much like, I believe, and I think that the hiring of Mike Mayock proves it, this is the Raiders being disruptive, right? They're not going to go along with how conventional thinking on things. And so when somebody sees the Mac trade for all the different reasons, and we know there were other things going on there, on face value, yeah, it looks crazy. But when you're trying to do things differently, set a culture, set the team on a different path, and you have to basically tear it down and build it back up, you do things that are disruptive. And that is also with, I mean, let's look at this as a business. Hayden, you run a business. I run a couple businesses as well. And you look at that, and you have to always look at the best possible people that'll help you achieve your goals, right? So sometimes that means moving on from people. And I think in this case, it's not that Derek Carr is a bad quarterback. He's a great guy. Everybody knows that. But if it doesn't help you get to your final goal, it doesn't matter. And if you find somebody who you think is going to do the role better, then you do that. And that's why I think fans sometimes, and I understand fandom, right, because we've all been fans of different teams, different sports, whatnot, is that you sometimes lose track of the sensibilities of decision-making when you have that fervor of being a fan. And I think if Derek Carr does move on, which is far from certain, but if he does, I don't think fans should move away from it. I think you should say, okay, well, he's going a different path and we're going a different path. I don't look at it any differently than any other business.
No, you can't. It's strictly a business decision. You can't look at the personal side of things when it comes to this. And because as a person, Derek Carr's like your A1 alpha guy. He's everything that you could want in a person that's going to be in the locker room. But if you're going to look at personalities and sort of like the human aspect to this, okay, let's say that Derek Carr leaves the locker room. Who's that going to be affecting? Because the Raiders don't really have many young players. They don't really have a whole lot of guys in there right now. They're sort of bringing in the young players for this draft. They've got 4 picks in the top 35 that are going to be hopefully the leaders for them going forward. And okay, you might disrupt a guy like Antonio Brown, who's he's supposedly put a pretty good rapport with Carr the last couple of weeks, but you also have to consider that if they acquire Kyler Murray, well, Antonio Brown was running routes with Kyler Murray in Texas in January. So there's already a rapport there going too. So I think we have to wait for the big picture to see what's going on. And look, thank goodness there's only 3 weeks to go, because all this draft stuff, it's really, there is a lot of smoke. And I think with John Gruden, because he's got that 10-year deal, it's really hard to tell what he's going to do. And if you look at the past few years when Reggie McKenzie was the general manager, you had a fairly good idea as to what direction the Raiders were going in. It was fairly linear at the approach that they took. There was not a whole lot of guessing on behalf of like the beat writers. We had a pretty good finger on the pulse. But when it comes to John Gruden, he changes his mind so suddenly and erratically that really anything could possibly happen in the coming weeks.
And Hayden, the other thing is, if you look at this whole situation, one of the things when we've had Michael Lombardi on several times. I know a lot of Raider fans don't like him because they feel like he's critical of the Raiders too often. But also in private conversations I've had with him, one of the things that he continues, and he said right when I had him on at the beginning of last season, he said, "Listen, can Gruden have the patience to build the right way?" His point of view now is that Gruden is rushing and that he's not following a plan, that he doesn't have a plan, and that he's just reacting to what's happening around him. I don't know that that's a fair criticism, because we don't know if there's a plan, and maybe he's following a plan. We just can't see it. But if you look at that, he uses, of course, because Lombardi, who worked for the Raiders, and then, of course, worked with Bill Belichick in New England, he says, look, if you look at Bill Belichick's never going to trade up to a number 1 pick to grab a quarterback. It's not the kind of – what he does is he has a system, he builds, he gets the guys he needs to do. Now, he lucked out, in my view, with Tom Brady. I mean, grabbing him in the 6th round, great. no one knew what was going to happen and how the run that they would go on, but certainly that system has worked. What about that criticism that, yes, you can turn things around quickly, but if you want to build a championship culture, a championship team that's going to stand the test of time and not maybe win one championship, but multiple, you need to do it the right way. Is there enough evidence to say that we know that Gruden's not doing that?
No, because the whole offseason was predicated on the draft for the Raiders, given the amount of picks that they had, and we haven't had the draft yet. So you can't say that there's no plan when you're overlooking the main piece of the whole offseason, which is the plan in the first place.
Right.
So I really like Lombardi. I think he has a lot of good points, but I think on this one, it's a little bit unwarranted, the criticism that he's been given Gruden. I don't agree with it at all.
No, and Michael's a great guy, and I don't always agree either, and that's the beauty of adult conversation is you could disagree without yelling at each other and calling each other names. Pardon me, but it happens on Twitter, of course, all the time. But nonetheless, Hayden, if we go past the quarterback position and we start to look at the rest of the draft, I mean, of course, the talk all along, and I'm with you. I'm starting to get a little bit of draft fatigue because we just all want, as folks who cover the NFL, as folks who talk about the NFL, we just want it to get here so we can get past it and then start to move on and see what these teams are going to look like. But if you get to that point, we talk about that number 4 pick. If they keep it, going defense, going edge rusher or inside with like a Quinnen Williams if he's there. The bottom of the first round really intrigues me because if you look at all the projections, and there's a million of them, and who's going to be available down there, you might have the opportunity to draft a linebacker down there, a good linebacker. You might have the opportunity to draft a cornerback. The Raiders have a massive hole at left guard as well, and there's going to be some position players there. It's going to be tough for them to decide should they keep those picks and things go in order as they are now, what to do there with the needs that you have. What do you think right now, based on that? Let's say they don't go quarterback, they stay stock with the picks that they have. That bottom of the first round, to me, is almost more interesting than number 4.
Oh, for sure, because there are so many more variables going on.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of good players. You know, one person I spoke to said, if you look at pick 7, or pick 8 in the draft, thereabouts, and you look at pick 28, pick 30, thereabouts there, that range between pick 7 and pick 27, pick 30, there's not a whole lot separating the talent level on those players. There's probably about half a dozen elite prospects, and then there's a whole bunch of about 25 to 30 guys who wouldn't be out of place if they were in that 7 to 10 range or if they were in that 25 to 30 range. So I think the Raiders really can get some true blue chippers to go forward and to really accelerate this rebuild. And there's a lot of good pass rushers in this draft. If the Raiders can't find at least 1 or 2 guys in this draft, I don't know how you can help them.
Well, and even linebacker, right? Like Brian Burns out of Florida State. I love that kid. Opportunity there, too. And with that number 35 pick, which is top of the second round, like you said, the talent level is not that far off. It's almost like having another number 1, the first round pick, I should say. And so I wouldn't be surprised, too, because of the draft picks that they have over the next several years. And this year, them even moving later picks on to move up further in the second and third round and to really stock up. I think we'll know a lot from the movement that they do there, whether they trade picks out to get certain players or they keep picks and stockpile players on what their plan is long term. We'll get much more of a sense for that on what 2019-2020 will look on based on that. But when we look past the draft, or I should say before the draft, and we look at free agency and what they've been able to do, it's real interesting. I like pretty much everything they've done. They've addressed some key needs there, of course, without really having to give much up. I mean, you look at the way the contracts are, and a lot of these are pretty much prove-it deals. Of course, today they signed wide receiver Ryan Grant, who was with the Colts. Some folks aren't real high on him. I think he's a good option. I think he's yet another body to come in. We've seen Gruden in his now going into his second season back in Oakland. He likes to create competition in camp. And to me, the more guys you can bring in, especially those that are cheap and aren't going to cost you anything, that's a good strategy in my view.
of course, you look at the wide receiver position this year, and they've really revamped it. You've got Antonio Brown, Tyrell Williams. Now you've also signed J.J. Nelson, and they've brought in Ryan Grant now. And 12 months ago, Ryan Grant signed a 4-year, $29 million deal that got vetoed because of a prior injury. So there's a really good chance that Grant can if he can establish himself on the team, he could be a really solid number 3 receiver. At the same time, he could flame out, and we could see Seth Roberts as the number 3 guy again, which really wouldn't surprise me at this point. We always think that, okay, this year is going to be the year that Seth Roberts isn't on the team, and he just finds his way on the team.
Yeah.
And he's done that for a few years in a row now, and I wouldn't bet against him.
No, to me as well, I think that they're looking clearly the current coaching staff sees something there, because clearly Gruden and company have no problem blowing somebody out if they feel like they fit in, right? And so the fact that they have Seth Roberts there, it could very well be say, hey, we see it in you, man. Now we're going to make it a really competitive camp. I'm sure they're going to draft some kids too. We're going to make it a really competitive camp, and we'll see if you stick out. If you don't, now, of course, they got the money there, but at the same time, to me, that wide receiver core has the ability. Also, that plays into what you've been talking about, quarterback, and looking at the type of guys that you would surround another quarterback with. You start to look differently at that position, and now you have Antonio Brown, so you feel really good about that, as well as Tyrell Williams, who I think has a big upside as well, without having to commit a ton of money on cap space as well. It was a good deal they structured there. But it'll be interesting, Hayden, because I really thought last camp was going to be even more competitive than it was. There were some surprises there, some not. This time, I think it's going to be intense, and that's only going to bring out the best in the players that do have in camp. Now, when you look at the needs, clearly on offense too, tight end. What are they going to do there? Because depending on if they have to trade up and they have to part with some of those lower first-round picks, they need to go out and replace oh my gosh, why am I blanking on names? Jared Cook. Thank you. So replacing Jared Cook, and they've tried to already do that a little bit in free agency. But if you look at it, there's some great picks, some great kids coming out of college at the tight end position. I don't know though if they're not going to have, if they trade away picks for a quarterback, let's say, they're going to have to address it differently or try to find a diamond in the rough. Correct?
Yeah, and that diamond in the rough could be potentially on the roster. I mean, John Gruden has never traditionally had elite tight ends in terms of a receiving threat down the field. He's always really focused on the running backs and the wide receivers. And but then again, he did choose to focus the offense last year around Jared Cook, and it worked pretty well. But I was disappointed they didn't keep him. I thought he could have been a nice piece. But there are 3 really good top tight ends this draft class. You've got TJ Hawkinson, you've got Noah Fant. Both of those are from Iowa, and then you've also got the kid from Alabama, Irv Smith. So if you can nab one of those, I think Irv Smith will probably be an early second-round pick. You could probably get him at 35. But I think Hawkinson or Fant, if you can get either one of those, around pick 24 sounds right for Fant. I think Hawkinson will go a little bit before them, but we see now in the modern game that the tight end position is really quite an important part of any arsenal, because they are big, they can get out in space, and they can move very fast, and they're a matchup nightmare because safeties. You look at defenses these days and they're trying to go smaller with more speed, but these big guys, these big tight ends that can line up out wide and they can run a 4.5 40 and they're 255 pounds, they can go up and get it in a jump ball situation as well. They're really difficult for defenses to match up on.
They are, and the signing of Luke Wilson, I think, is a little bit under the radar. I'm not saying that he's going to necessarily be the answer, but here's a guy who played in Seattle, did really well, had one great season as well up there. And then he goes to the Lions on a free agent deal, and the Lions offense was just brutal, right? So I don't even count last year for this guy. So I think that even though he was late in the signing period, which usually shows that there's not a ton of interest, here's a guy who's out there to prove it. He has the size, he has the ability to catch the ball, 29 years old, okay, but he's going to be in the mix too, which is good. I think, again, the mixture of free agents and the ability to go draft a kid, along with guys like Lee Smith and Darren Waller, who are on the roster as well. Those are guys that you'll just see who pokes out. I mean, obviously Lee Smith is not a big pass catcher, but bringing in a guy like Luke Wilson gives you at least a little bit of an insurance policy should you be able to not address it in the draft. Now, looking at running back, okay, we see Isaiah Crowell come in. What's your thoughts on that signing?
I think he's a solid number 2 runner, but I have some reservations if they're going in with him as the lead back for this season. I think they're going to have to find someone that's going to be able to at least split the carries with him, and because I don't think he's a true number 1 back, but he's a high-end number 2.
Yeah, no, a solid signing. A lot of people kind of are maligning the signing, but I think it's a good choice, especially if Marshawn Lynch doesn't come back, because Crowell is a guy who's going to run a lot between the tackles. He can catch the ball out of the backfield, but he doesn't run downfield routes. He's a guy you're going to dump the ball off to in that offense. And then he does have some breakaway speed when he does get out in the open and he gets past and outside the hash marks, he can open it up a little bit. So I agree with you. I think as a number 2 would be great. Who emerges as number 1? That's going to be the question. It's not a great draft. In fact, it's a pretty terrible draft when it comes to running backs as well. So I don't think they're going to be able to address it. They might get a guy to add into the mix there, but it's going to be, I think, a position they're going to have to address as they head into 2020 and the draft comes here to Las Vegas. What else are you hearing, and what else do you think with the draft coming up? Any surprises that, in addition to them possibly moving up and grabbing a quarterback?
I think you're going to see them trade down from pick 24 or 27 because you've got pick 35 as their second round pick, and then they don't have one until the 4th round. It's about pick, I want to say, in the about 100-ish, 108, maybe about around there. So there's quite a gap there, and you're going to want to have at least one pick in between that. So it wouldn't surprise me if they try to trade down either from 27 or 35, grab a second round pick, but grab that 3rd rounder that you can make up for from the Antonio Brown trade. Yeah,
and that's a good point. You're going to need you don't want to go. You don't want to miss some of those early, the mid-early rounds there to stockpile some talent. So, yeah, I think that's very possible. But again, it all goes back to what's the price they're going to have to pay if your scenario were to come true and they were to move up. If they had to, it's going to be fascinating. I think draft, that first night of the draft is going to be a doozy because while some drafts are more active than others, I think there are so many teams that are looking at some dynamic players here, and some teams really want to make a splash, and it's going to be fascinating as we get closer to the draft. So it'll be good. And also, Hayden, I want to update you as we close out that today, you know how you hear from some of these folks out there that the stadium is going to be delayed and all that. We tried to dispel that rumor over and over again.
It's not being delayed.
No.
It's not getting delayed.
No. And today, another milestone, my man, they started to put the big steel trusses at the top of the stadium, which are going to hold the roof. So the stadium is now, you've seen the videos, of course, and the pictures of the steel structure going up. Now it's starting to close off to the top, and it's starting to look like the oval stadium that it will be. So a big, big day here in Las Vegas, and for the Raiders, as that next big piece and that next big milestone has passed. So we're getting closer, and for somebody, Hayden, I know you don't have the luxury of driving by it every day like I do, but it's jamming, and I see so many Raider fans, my man, coming here on vacation because, so many Raider fans from Southern California come up to Las Vegas all the time, and people are going out there taking pictures. The excitement is building, and as excited as everybody is for the draft and for next season, 2020 is just around the corner, and things are getting exciting. And I know you're going to have to make a trip out for that, right?
Oh, you bet. I'll come out. I'm not sure when. I'm going to come out, though. That's for sure.
Yeah, you got to come out for the 2020 season at least, and do a show with us live on the radio and everything. It'll be a blast. Big things coming on that side, so it'll be fun. Hayden, man, I appreciate you being with us. Your morning, my evening, great time, and go read Hayden's piece that we were talking about on the quarterback situation in the draft. silverandblacktoday.com. Always read Hayden's stuff; it's great stuff, and always well thought out and researched. Which is why he's one of the best in the business. So, Hayden, thanks, man. We appreciate you being with us.
No, thanks, Scott. Have a great night.
You too. All right, guys, you have been listening to a live version of the Silver and Black Today podcast here on Spreaker. Of course, the archive of this will be available on demand wherever you get podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, you name it, on YouTube. We always put our audio up on YouTube, so if you're a YouTube folk that want to listen to your podcast there, you can do that there as well. We'll always have it available wherever you want it because we want to be accessible to you and all of Raider Nation. So make sure you check it out there. Make sure you subscribe. That's the important thing, too, is to subscribe to the show and also rate it. Subscribe on YouTube, you name it. We'll be back on Sunday, 8 to 10 a.m. Make sure you watch us on YouTube, Facebook Live. Subscribe at YouTube. Hit notifications so you don't miss it. For Hayden Nadolny, I am Scott Branson, silverandblacktoday.com. We'll see you next time.